Welcome to the Discovering Leadership podcast. My name is Corbin Hannis, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Carl Bowden. Carl, you want to tell us a little bit about what we're talking about today?
We're talking about the fundamentals of leadership, specifically service. Now, before we go into today's topic, the purpose of the Discovering Leadership podcast is to invest in you. It is to invest in the fundamentals of leadership, to help you build in your relationships, to help you craft strategy in your business and your personal life. It's to help you live to your most authentic self. We want to build a community of leaders. We want to lead leaders to help people to lead by example. Now, for today's topic on service, we're going to be hitting topics such as focusing on others first and giving more than we receive in leadership. And then what might be some consequences of self-centered leadership? And then what is the example that you want to see in the world? Now, today we are joined by President Rick Muma, named the 15th president of Wichita State University on May 6, 2021. Rick earned a Bachelor of Science in Physician Assistant Studies from the University of Texas Medical Branch-Galveston, a Master of Public Health and Community Health from the University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston, and a Ph.D. in Higher Education Administration from the University of Missouri St. Louis. While at Wichita State, he has also served as the Executive Vice President and Provost, Senior Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Strategic Enrollment Management, and Chair and Professor in the Departments of Public Health Sciences and Physician Assistant. Muma has also served as chair for St. Louis University's Department of Physician Assistant Education and an assistant professor at the University of Texas Medical Branch-Galveston's Department of PA Studies. Rick has more than 30 years of experience as a professor, administrator, and physician assistant in internal medicine and infectious diseases. Please welcome Rick Muma.
Hello, everyone. Carl and Corbin, it's great to be on this podcast. Looking forward to having a conversation about service.
Well, thank you for joining us, Rick. We really appreciate your time. Maybe you could start off with just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing at Wichita State.
Well, a little bit about myself. You read off several things. I started my career as a clinician back in 1985, in the very beginning of the HIV epidemic. Just kind of thrust into that area of medicine. And it really shaped who I am today, spending the first 10 years of my career caring for some of the most vulnerable individuals with a very serious condition. One thing led to another, and I started as a professor at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and then had the opportunity to come to Wichita State as their program was expanding. Wichita State has one of the earliest PA programs in the country that started almost 50 years ago, and had an opportunity to come here. And so I took that opportunity and later became department chairs of two different departments, and then eventually the provost and now the president. I'll have to just say that typically you don't see presidents who have that kind of background. All I ever really wanted to be was a clinician when I got out of college. But I believe that particular profession has suited me well to where I am today as a university president. And the cool thing about Wichita State is that we're really focusing on serving this community. We're the state's only urban public research university. That means two things. to provide affordable access to higher education to anybody who wants to come to the university, but also help our community solve problems through research, through creative activities, and other service initiatives. So the fact that we're talking about service and leadership through service really fits well with what we're doing here at Wichita State and what I'm doing here at Wichita State.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to hear your background because you've always been serving as a clinician, as a PA. You're always serving others and enhancing the livelihoods of others. So, you're perfect for this episode on service. But I want to ask the question, how important is having an attitude of service in leadership?
I think it's very important in just my experience in working along the way in my career with other leaders. The ones that I believe that make the most impact are ones that are what you would call servant leaders that focus primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities that these people live in. And also, I think a servant leader is someone who is willing to share authority or power or however you want to say it, and put the needs of others first, and help develop people, and so they can perform at their highest level. So to answer your question, it's a very, very important skill and attribute, I think, of not only university presidents, but anybody who is working in a leadership role at any kind of organization.
Oh yeah, Rick, I couldn't agree more. As you were saying, like passing on that role and passing things down to people that you're working with, it's super important. I think about like my business. Whenever I'm working with my teammates and I've got my lead accountant with me, I've got my marketing guy with me, if I'm trying to take control over everything that's going on inside the business, then we're really not going to be as productive, or we're not going to actually be able to provide all the value that we want to be able to provide and fulfill the mission towards our clients. It's damn near impossible if I'm trying to do it all myself. So I definitely resonated with what you said there, but I've got a question for you. Can you give me an example of a servant leader in your past and your life that had an impact on you through their service?
Yeah, actually, it's two people, and it's really
Even
where I got
better.
my start down in Texas. And they both have the first name of Richard, and of course that's my name too, Richard. I go by Rick, but so it's the three Richards. Um, but back to where I started my career in infectious disease and taking care of HIV patients, and I was sort of taken under the wing of Dr. Richard Pollard, who is he's an nationally known um, virologist. He practiced in infectious disease, but his whole area of expertise was virology, specifically herpes virology. And it's the reason why he, in the early 80s, started caring for HIV patients, because he had that expertise. And in the early 80s, you guys are way too young to remember all of the ins and outs of HIV and how that started in our society. But in the early years of the disease, in the early 80s, really people didn't really know what was going on. But they did know that it was probably a virus. And so anyway, that's how he got into it. And he spent the good portion of the 80s just really being the only individual in that Houston-Galveston area who was willing to take care of this patient population that was stricken with this very serious virus. And in those days, presented with some really, really horrible manifestations from a suppressed immune system caused by HIV. with no treatments really. And him modeling that behavior, me as a PA, one of the first PAs that actually worked in that field, really made a big impact on me. And just the selflessness, the concern, the only individual that was willing to step up to the plate to take care of these patients, was just very inspiring. The other Dr. Richard Rare, who's the chair of the PA department at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, who took me under his wing when I became a faculty member. He said this to me more than once, and always when there's an opportunity given to you, walk through that door to the other side, because if you don't, you won't know what those opportunities would be for you. And you may not like what you see on the other side of the door. You can always go back, but you may miss an opportunity. So I've always taken that to heart. It's really kind of also shaped who I am today and getting to where I am today. Not too many PAs in the world would ever think about becoming a university president. I didn't when I started in my profession, but I always walked through that door when there was opportunities given to me, and it's kind of how I live my life. So these leaders in different ways, but also very impactful in their approach.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear those examples. And I heard you say that, these people, the Richards, I guess, they modeled that behavior. They lived the example. And then one thing that stuck out to me is that one of the Richards, they had said that, when there's an opportunity, you have to walk through that door.
Yeah.
And then see where that takes you. There's so much you can learn from that as well. I wanted to ask the question of, from those examples, how much were they focused on themselves versus focusing on others in their leadership?
Well, I think both of those individuals are just really good examples of being so selfless. I mean, they, in terms of Dr. Richard Pollard taking care of patients, I mean, he spent hours making sure he was available for them because there were so many needs. I never forget a story about him is that in the early days, we didn't have computers. We knew we needed to take care of patients and protect their information and understand that this was something that needed to be preserved about their condition, what they presented with. And in those days, we didn't have iPhones or iPads or laptops. We had note cards. You may know what that is. I don't know. You may have seen a note card. We don't use it.
Maybe.
Probably once or twice.
He wrote every one of those patients' name on a note card, how they presented, when they presented, what their conditions were, when they passed away, and he had them in his pocket of his lab coat. And I said to him one day, I said, we did start to have access to computers, floppy drives, and that sort of thing. I said, I'm really worried that we're going to lose those note cards one day, and we're going to lose all this important information that you've jotted down about the patient. And I said, can I take those from you and enter those into a spreadsheet? He's really very reticent about that because he's going to potentially lose all this data. I was finally able to convince him to do that, and of course we moved on from there. But it was just so concerned about those individuals and what they had in terms of their background that they shared with him, and he wanted to preserve that, and that was just very important to him. And Dr. Richard Rare, who was one of the first PAs in the country, and not sure how much you know about that profession. It's only been around for about 50, 60 years. Very transformative profession. Really is one thing that one of the main things that has transformed the practice of medicine, the most consequential thing over the last 50, 60 years, aside from antibiotics and those sorts of things, but really has changed how we practice medicine and provide access to individuals. And he spent his entire career um, making sure that that message was out there. Wasn't about him, but it was about um, you know patient care, access to care, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, sticking to the mission or or the betterment of all.
Yeah,
That's huge. It wasn't about himself, but it was about the greater overall mission.
yeah, exactly.
So that has me curious. As a follower, whether that's yourself or any of the other Richards out there that were following these Richards, um, how do followers react whenever their leaders put themselves before others?
You mean the opposite, that they're thinking about themselves.
Yes. Yeah. My apologies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, you know, I think one of the biggest things that you see is lack of progress, lack of enthusiasm for what you're doing. A lot of confusion. Um,
Yeah.
Servant leaders or leaders that put service ahead of everything else
Mm.
are concerned about the people that they work with. And I say that intentionally, people that they work with, as opposed to the people that work for them. Um, I'm very cognizant of saying those kind of words and being very clear. And again, this is something that I learned as a PA, is that um, I always say we are working together, or I'm working with this person, not that
All right.
they are working for me, um, or vice versa, because it puts these hierarchical barriers in place. Um, to your point and to your question, that you're more likely to get more productivity, more buy-in if people feel like they're part of the team. And I think putting um, people first is the most important thing.
That's huge. That's what leadership's all about. And servant leadership does that. We had to put people first. I liked what you said about we want to have a mind of working with people rather than having someone work for us as leaders. And when you work with, that shows that you're kind of on the same level and we're willing to learn from each other. I like that. Now, how have you implemented a mind of service as the president of Wichita State?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the overall mission of the university, um, uh, and I mentioned this earlier, that we're an urban public research university, and this really just means two things: that we're two broad things, that we're making sure that we provide affordable access to anybody in this community, and then helping our community solve problems through research and creative activities and service. And we're driven every day by three priorities. That first one is affordable access to higher education. The second one is to making sure that we're working with um, those that hire our graduates, that they feel like they have a good talent pipeline to fill their needs. And the third one is to increase economic prosperity for those living in our community in general, um, so that we grow as not only as a community, but as an institution. So I'm laser focused on those three priorities every day. And that's all I talk about. I was just actually having a conversation before I got on this podcast with one of my colleagues about that. Sometimes I feel like I'm a broken record, but it's very clear what we're
Mm.
doing here at this institution. One of our sister institutions here in the state was down visiting with me um, a couple months ago, and he said to me recently, he said, one of the things that I got from that visit, and everybody I talked to when I was touring the campus and focusing on what Wichita State was doing, that everybody knew what the three priorities were. And it's so important to make sure that everybody is in line. They can get to those three priorities in various different ways. Um, I think it's important that they understand what those are. And for our case, Wichita State being an urban public research university, which services kind of embedded into those two things that I mentioned, um, it's important for people to understand that. And so that's what I talk about all the time.
Yeah, that's key. And when you kind of over communicate that, where you sound like an open, a broken record, I guess you could say, that really ingrains it in people's minds. It becomes a part of them. And that's a huge leadership trait right there, is communicating that mission effectively. This is what we're all about.
Yeah, and the good thing about Wichita State, and I know that you two are past students or current students, um, I hope that resonates with the students across the campus. I believe it does, and things that I have experienced, and I know it does with our faculty and staff. And it certainly does with the people who care about our success, with the state legislature, the governor, the Kansas Board of Regents. We have a great story to tell, one that's really connecting with our community in a very service-oriented way.
Yeah, and I definitely noticed that about Wichita State, having affordable access to education, having that talent pipeline. I've never been to a university where they were so connected with the business community or just the general public, such as Wichita. And just having those resources available for students, it's been a huge benefit for me, and I know Corbin as well, being students of Wichita State. So I think that message has been clearly communicated, and you guys have done a great job.
That's great to hear.
So yeah, talking about the priorities, I'm curious, Rick. What would you say that you do as a leader out at WSU uh, to be able to help the staff, help the students, or even the community members, maybe some of the businesses, to be able to live by example and push these priorities that you've set for the university?
Yeah, I really two things. Now, I think I'm kind of unusual. I've been at the university for 26 years. And so I started out as a faculty member. I became a department chair. I did a lot of the grunt work in academic affairs to move the university forward and kind of behind the scenes. Then became the provost and now president. And so I had the opportunity to really learn the university inside out. There's not really any part of this institution that I haven't had some opportunity to be a part of, and that that makes it easier for people to see me because they saw me or see me lead by example because they've seen me in all of these roles along the way. So that's one of the main things. Another, and I just have to say, many of these people that are my colleagues are still here. There's a lot of longevity of people here at this institution. We know each other well. I've spent a lot of time having many conversations with folks across campus. But the second thing I think is that I really try to lead with integrity, honesty, open conversations, transparency, understanding that not everyone will agree about everything I say, and I won't always agree with them. But we have the opportunity to engage in a dialogue, and they feel like they have an opportunity to weigh in and influence the organization. Again, it may not always go their way, or even may not always go my way, but the opportunity is there. And I think the other thing kind of related to this, I'm not afraid to try new things, and therefore I encourage people at the organization to try new things. I'm not willing to, or I'm not unwilling to take risk, and therefore I want to make sure people can try new things and can fail, and we can learn from that. Um, so I just try to encourage that kind of interaction. Again, we're not perfect at this, but
Yeah.
overall, this is kind of, I think, the best way to uh, help lead an organization. Um, and I think for the most part, it does work. It requires a lot of commitment to this and a lot of being willing to be a little vulnerable in the conversations. I think that's also important. Just to be real about what you're trying to do as a organization and leading that organization.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The,
So that kind of leads me to another point is throughout the organization we've got these priorities, right? And we know the stakeholders, we know who's involved in helping organize the priorities, and we know who sees the benefit of them. I'm curious, is there do you have a personal mission or purpose, and is there anything that correlates between that personal mission and purpose towards the organization and what you do to help others live by example and serve the purpose of these priorities?
I don't know if I would call it what did you say, a purpose statement or a
Yeah, like a
mission statement?
purpose or a mission that you want to live out and be an example of.
Well, I've mentioned some of this a little bit already. I started my career in healthcare. Always been committed to taking care of some of the most vulnerable, underrepresented, underserved um, populations. That's really how the PA profession started. Is really committed to that kind of um, um, you know not access, but that kind of practice. Um, and that's really translated well, I think, what we're doing here at the university in terms of students. In fact, a lot of similarities um, there are a lot of similarities in what we do here in education that came from healthcare. A lot of our data analytic tools that we use were first developed in healthcare organizations to improve patient outcomes. And we use those same analytic tools to help improve student outcomes. Ultimately, we want students to be successful and continue on and graduate in a reasonable time frame. Um, so that work that I did all along in healthcare and public health, caring for patients so they would have improvements in their lives, is translated into doing the same thing for our students. And to me, I see them not very much different. And because of that whole approach, I believe, and others that are working here at the university, I think would agree that we are making progress in improving um, access, affordability, um, student success, and ultimately that they graduate and go on to live productive lives and serving their communities.
I really like how you apply so many different experiences in your life to apply to your current position. You've learned through all these different experiences, trying new things, looking at things through different perspectives, having an open mind of learning, and then, with being a PA, applying that to Wichita State and and enhancing Wichita State through that experience.
You
That's
know,
huge.
yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that I believe that makes you a good clinician is to be curious.
Mm,
And, uh, a lot of uh, patient interactions that clinicians engage in are all about trying to figure out what's going on that led them to the reason why they came and saw you in the first place on any given day. Um, and being curious about them, being curious about their differences. That's one of the things I do miss about patient care because, obviously I'm not doing that now as a president. I'm still a licensed PA, and I always say to myself, well, yeah, I could actually go back and do that because you never really lose that skill and diagnosing a situation.
It's that muscle memory.
But what's that?
It's that muscle memory.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but the most important thing that I think is important to this particular situation, that this particular question, is to be curious about the differences that people bring to the table and helping them get to where they need to get to be in terms of a successful outcome. Same thing with students in terms of getting them to the point where they need to be successful and graduate from university.
Wow. We had a recent conversation of another leader, and we're talking about leadership, and that was one of the things they said is we need to be curious as leaders, because when we're curious, that shows that we're interested in them. It shows that we're serving that other person, and we're willing to look at things through different perspectives and different ways of doing things or being, who we are as individuals.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a good trait or not, but it relates to what you were just saying. So I've been, um, well, people have said this about me, is that when you first meet Rick Muma, he'll know everything about you, um, but you'll know very little about him. So I think to your point about service in terms of leadership and servant leadership, putting people first, that is really who I am. And that's manifested, I think, in that comment. I kind of take that more of a compliment and not a negative, but that's a frequent critique that people give of me.
Yeah, I've noticed at my time at Wichita State that you've always been out in the community. You've always served others, and you're willing to rally around the initiative of Wichita State, but rally around your people. And I think that's what gravitates people towards you and really to leaders in general. It's because you're fighting for them, you're with them uh, in whatever they're going through. So we really appreciate that from you, Rick. And I was just wondering, what's one piece of advice that you would give to this podcast audience?
Well, it really goes back to one of my mentors, Dr. Richard Rare, and I said this earlier, and I think it's worth repeating, is just take advantage of every opportunity. When a door is open for you, go through it. You can always turn around, but if you don't, you'll miss that opportunity. It's served me well in who I've become today, um, and I think it will serve anybody well with that particular attitude and just being open to new things and willingness. You know, it's such a much more exciting way to live a professional life, to be open to doing things in new ways and understanding you can always go back if you need to.
Awesome. Well, Rick, thank you so much for being on this podcast. We really appreciate you. We want to give you the opportunity to share with the podcast audience. Is there anything that you would like to share with them?
Well, I've shared a lot today. No, I just think that always keep in mind, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but you see where I am today, university president.
Hmm.
This is not where I started in my career and never even thought about that. Um,
Mm.
but there is opportunities for people to move on, move up in organizations, and just really take those opportunities.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rick. It goes back to one of your examples, Richard, and seeing the opportunities and then walking through the door when they come across.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. For our podcast listeners, our next episode is going to continue the Fundamentals of Leadership series, and we're going to be talking about empathy and authenticity. So, perfect segue to what we were talking about today in terms of looking at things through different perspectives and being our 100% authentic self, being who we truly are, being real. So remember, you can catch each podcast episode every other Tuesday, either on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts.
And don't forget to check out Enturian.com. That's ENTURIAN.com. You can also take a look at exemplifyleadership.com. Carl and I here are posting all the updates on the podcast on every single social media channel we got. So make sure you take a look so that you can stay updated. Additionally, if you'd like to see the video format of this podcast, we're posting it on YouTube. Go look at the Enturian YouTube channel. Again, that's ENTURIAN.com. Well, that's a great episode, man. I'm really happy. I really, really appreciate your time, Rick. And I think you added a lot of value here. The last thing I got for our audience members is just to remember that alone we survive, but together we thrive. We'll see you on the next episode. Awesome.